At precisely 12:07 a.m., long after the servants had retired to their private quarters and the last vestiges of twilight had dissolved into night, a single notification blinked into life on Buckingham Palace's secure internal network. At first, it was just a soft pulse, quiet enough to be mistaken for a routine alert, insignificant enough that it could have been dismissed with a casual glance. But in a building where centuries of history intertwine with the present, and where even the faintest signal can carry consequence, that single pulse carried weight beyond measure. It wasn't loud, it wasn't accompanied by alarms, there were no flashing red warnings, no urgent tones. And yet, within the silent architecture of power, behind walls that had stood through wars, coronations, and constitutional crises, that one quiet alert hit like a concussion. The message itself was deceptively simple. Short, clinical, unyielding, verified medical diagnosis. 2 words that once read could not be unread, once registered could not be shrugged off. Within seconds, the palace's hidden nerve center, a lattice of encrypted communications far removed from the public eye, came alive with an eerie glow. A cascade of screens flickered in dimly lit rooms, illuminating faces that moments before had been relaxed, even routine. And then stillness. Conversations halted mid-syllable, coffee cups paused halfway to lips, footsteps that had been moving purposefully along marble floors stopped, echoing faintly in long corridors lined with regal paintings and tapestries. Somewhere behind carved oak doors that guarded private chambers, a caretaker stood ashen-faced, phone still in hand. Across the palace's glittering hallways, corridors that had borne witness to centuries of royal certainty, a single truth, long contained, long managed, long wrestled with behind closed doors, was finally out. The name at the center of it all, the one whispered in private staff rooms, discussed in clipped tones by long-serving aides, and guarded carefully in confidential briefings. Prince Louis. He was the youngest member of the royal family. The boy whose laughter once seemed to soften the crown's gravitas. The child whose gleeful, mischievous smiles had invigorated public appearances. The face that reminded the world that even royal lives, sculpted by tradition and duty, still held space for childhood wonder. To the watching public, he had been lightness and joy, a reminder of youth amid the ceremony and formality of palace life. But now everything shifted. Because no one on the outside knew. No one could know. Not yet. Not until now. What could possibly frighten even the most seasoned royals, the ones who were raised to withstand public scrutiny, who have endured scandal after scandal, crisis after crisis, and constitutional storms that would have toppled lesser institutions into stunned silence. This was not gossip, not a rumor, not a mischievous tweet or a scandalous headline crafted by tabloid editors. This was something different, something raw, something that couldn't be spun away with careful messaging, something internal, official, undeniable. But before we go deeper, before we unwrap the implications and the human cost of this revelation, make sure you're subscribed. Because what unfolds here is not just another royal update, not just a sensational story, but a moment that, if fully understood, may redefine the future of the crown itself. There was no ceremony when the message arrived, no announcement, no subtle hint, no staged moment designed to acclimate palace aides, security advisors, or members of the inner circle to prepare them emotionally or strategically. There were no rehearsals, no rehearsed statements drafted in advance, no crisis playbook to activate. It simply arrived, alone, unannounced, uncushioned, without preparation, without context. Just one immutable truth confirmed. Phones vibrated behind closed doors in rapid succession. Security aides paused, reading and rereading the same words. Staff members stopped mid-stride, caught between disbelief and dread. A private musical rehearsal, once a place of laughter and light, was abruptly halted, the strain of strings hanging silent in the air. Meetings were cancelled without explanation, their agendas left unfinished, documents untouched, coffee still steaming in porcelain cups. The atmosphere changed. Not gradually, not like an incoming storm rolling in from far beyond the palace walls, but instantly, pervasively. like a sudden shift in the gravity of the place. This was not like the usual rumors that drift in from tabloids, not like anonymous whispers that make their rounds through back channels and gossip columns. This was internal, verified, time-stamped, marked urgent. No room for denial, no place to hide. This was the kind of confirmation that penetrates every layer of denial and goes straight to the core of power. The kind of news that makes even seasoned advisors pause, swallow hard, and rethink every assumption they've held for years. For years, there had been quiet conversations behind closed doors, controlled discussions in windowed rooms, careful reassessments shared only with the most trusted aides. There had been speculation, yes. There had been cautious speculation in hushed tones, but always in private, always manageable, always something that could be contained, deferred, or explained away until now. And then one phrase began to echo through the palace corridors, over the hum of security systems, past portraits of long-dead monarchs, beneath chandeliers that had seen centuries of rule. Why now? The question repeated like a heartbeat in the minds of those closest to the situation. Why now when no transition had been prepared? Why now when no narrative had been carefully constructed for public consumption? Why now when the monarchy had worked so deliberately to protect not just an institution, but a legacy? Why now after all this time? This wasn't a crisis that could be delayed any longer. This was a truth that had finally outgrown secrecy. And in that moment, in the still, charged air of Buckingham Palace, everyone knew. Things were no longer just serious. They were unprecedented. Senior aides later admitted something almost impossible. They had never witnessed a single notification cause such instantaneous disruption in the palace's meticulously ordered world. Behind the scenes, doors were quietly but firmly secured. Corridors that usually buzzed with discreet activity were emptied. Entire floors, from grand staterooms to staff quarters, were cleared of unnecessary movement like dominoes toppled by an unseen hand. For all intents and purposes, Buckingham Palace, the heart of British monarchy and centuries-old ceremony, had entered a silent lockdown. Security protocols whispered into action. Phones that once connected aides to schedules now buzzed with frantic internal chatter. And in that sudden stillness, one truth became painfully clear. Prince Louis's recent absence from public events could no longer be brushed off as simple childhood privacy. No longer could it be explained away as gentle introduction or personal choice. It felt deliberate, calculated, weighted. Every missed appearance, every absence from milestones, every carefully framed family photograph shared with the public, every gentle, polite press explanation released by Buckingham Palace. They began to crumble under the pressure of confirmation, not conjecture anymore, but documented certainty. Inside the family, reactions were not theatrical as tabloids often paint. They were painfully human. Catherine, always composed in the public eye, always measured in posture and tone, was reportedly inconsolable behind closed doors. For years, she had carried something heavy with her, a quiet vigilance that now manifested as raw, unguarded emotion. What the public saw as poise was, at home, a mother's dread wrapped in a veneer of royal restraint. Prince William, steady, dutiful, and trained to face crises with resolve, did not retreat from communications in anger. He withdrew with purpose, with calculation, with a mind racing through futures he had spent his entire life preparing for, futures rooted in continuity, duty, and the certainty of lineage. Now that future felt unstable, like sand shifting underfoot. And then, the most dangerous question of all began to circulate behind palace walls. If this diagnosis was only confirmed now, who brought it into the light? Was it someone within the palace's inner circle? A trusted confidant who could no longer shoulder the weight of secrecy? Or was the truth pushed forward from outside, a fissure in the fortress of silence? That question hovered in every senior aide's mind. In every hushed conversation, in every glance exchanged in the hushed corridors of power. Because beneath the composure and ceremonial pageantry of monarchy, A private fear had been exposed. The palace may have tried to contain the truth, but the truth had its own momentum. And now that it was out, there was no turning back. Was it a doctor bound by oath, trained in discipline, sworn to silence, yet finally crushed beneath the weight of conscience? Did someone reach that quiet, irreversible breaking point where professional loyalty collides with moral truth? Was there a leak, deliberate, strategic, calculated? Or was it desperate? A final act of quiet rebellion from someone who could no longer participate in the illusion? Or perhaps, and this possibility unsettled the palace most of all, perhaps the institution that had perfected secrecy over centuries had simply lost control of it. Because this was not merely a medical update. It was not just a diagnosis entered into a file. It was the unveiling of a hidden chapter, one that had been carefully rewritten, redacted, and buried beneath ceremonial smile, less and public reassurance. And as shock radiated outward through royal circles, from senior advisors to private secretaries, from medical liaisons to security chiefs, one brutal truth emerged with undeniable clarity. Prince Louis's story had never been only about health. It was about stability. It was about succession. It was about the fragile architecture of monarchy itself. This diagnosis, fully understood, had the potential to become the most explosive liability the crown had faced in decades. Not because of illness, but because of implication. For years, they had fought to contain it, to manage it, to compartmentalize it. Now the walls were thinning. Observers began combing through archived footage. Old broadcasts resurfaced. Slow-motion clips were replayed, paused, analyzed. Moments once dismissed as charming quirks suddenly felt different. A slight imbalance while crossing a courtyard. A fraction too long pause before answering a simple question. A faint tremor in a small hand raised in a ceremonial wave. A brief look of confusion before a reassuring hand guided him forward. At the time, these were interpreted as childhood energy, shyness, playfulness, the unpredictability of youth in formal settings. But hindsight is merciless. It sharpens, it reinterprets. It turns innocence into evidence. What once looked harmless now felt unsettling. The signs had always been there, scattered like breadcrumbs through years of public appearances. We simply didn't know what we were seeing. Until now. Former palace staff, speaking anonymously and with visible hesitation, described internal language designed to soften reality. Certain episodes were referred to as tiredness events. A gentle euphemism. A linguistic cushion placed between truth and acknowledgement. One former footman recalled being reprimanded for something seemingly harmless, asking whether Prince Louis might require additional rest following a particularly taxing engagement. The response was immediate, cold. The message unmistakable. Do not speculate. Do not inquire. Do not question. Even the long-serving royal nanny, once viewed as a steady presence in Louis's early childhood, departed abruptly for personal reasons. But insiders whispered a different narrative. Discomfort, concern, an inability to reconcile what she was witnessing with the silence that surrounded it. Her departure left a subtle but noticeable void. And soon after, Catherine began withdrawing from select public engagements, citing her desire to spend more time with her children. Publicly, it was framed as maternal devotion. Privately, it was strategic protection. Protection from scrutiny, from speculation, from a world that dissects royal children frame by frame, from a public that can be both adoring and unforgiving. Then came Switzerland, late 2025, publicly described as a family wellness retreat. The phrase was gentle, pastoral, harmless, but behind that phrasing lay something far more clinical. At a prestigious neurodevelopmental facility, known quietly for handling high-profile cases with absolute discretion, Louis underwent extensive evaluation. This was not exploratory curiosity. It was monitoring, tracking progression, assessing stability, adjusting expectations. Inside Buckingham Palace, subtle protocols began to shift. Camera angles during public events were reconsidered. Schedules were shortened. Appearances carefully curated. Staff were instructed to remain within arm's reach at all times. Never allow vulnerability to appear unguarded. Never let uncertainty linger too long. Always be ready. But secrecy is not neutral. It isolates. And behind closed doors, the battle was no longer against tabloids or public opinion. It was against time. Deep inside the Royal Medical Archives lies a file few are permitted to see. Its internal designation, Project Solstice. Restricted access. Layered clearance. Years of testing, psychiatric evaluations, private consultations conducted in silence. The truth. The diagnosis had been confirmed long before the notification that shook the palace. An uncommon degenerative neurological disorder. Rare, poorly documented, unpredictable. Some patients stabilize for years. Others decline rapidly before adolescence. The prognosis, according to internal memoranda, was described as variable but concerning. Privately, another phrase was used. A ticking clock, and the palace chose silence. Legal documents were drafted with urgency. Medical access was compartmentalized. Certain physicians were reassigned. Others replaced entirely. Foreign experts were discreetly brought in under alternative professional titles. A pediatric neurogeneticist from Sweden, a Canadian child neurologist with military consultation experience in cognitive risk assessment, an Israeli specialist in early genetic neurodegenerative markers. Each signed lifetime non-disclosure agreements. Each conducted private evaluations. Each reached the same devastating conclusio. End. The condition could affect both motor function and cognitive development. There was no recognized cure, and the implications extended far beyond one child. A royal child potentially unable to fulfill constitutional obligations. A future monarch facing neurological uncertainty. For an institution built on stability, predictability, and inherited continuity, this was seismic. Still reeling from decades of controversy, scandal, and shifting public trust, the monarchy could not risk another destabilizing headline. Sources claim King Charles issued the final directive. The report would not reach Parliament. It would not receive formal recognition. It would not influence succession discussions. The file was sealed, locked away. But secrets are not static. They generate heat, pressure, and over time, Project Solstice began to overheat. Then someone inside the palace decided the silence had crossed a moral line. A junior nursery aide, low-ranking, rarely acknowledged publicly, had quietly observed everything. The rehearsed responses before public events, the carefully scripted interactions, the precise minute-by-minute management of Louis's time in front of cameras. They documented medication adjustments, behavioral fluctuations, abrupt cancellations, subtle deviations from planned schedules. They kept a diary, not gossip, not speculation, documentation. Clinical observations paired with emotional realities. One entry described Catherine sitting beside Louis long after the palace lights dimmed, wiping away tears she would never allow the public to see. Another detailed her losing composure in a private consultation room, pleading with doctors for a breakthrough, for hope, for certainty. And then came the final entry. It was not written for headlines, not for Parliament, not even for history. It was written because someone inside those walls could no longer endure the weight of silence. The diary was leaked anonymously to an international health oversight body. The crack in the wall was small, but it was enough. And now the question is no longer whether Prince Louis's condition was hidden. The real question is, how many people knew? For how long? Who approved the silence? And what else remains buried within Project Solstice? Because when secrecy becomes strategy, truth becomes dangerous. and the monarchy may soon discover that controlling a narrative is far easier than controlling the consequences of its collapse. Stay with us, because what unfolds next may not simply alter a chapter in royal history. It may redefine the future of the crown forever.